I know firsthand the importance of nourishing our bodies, especially during pregnancy. That's why I want to share Ritual and their Essential for Women prenatal with you. This is the prenatal I took during my pregnancy after researching a ton of different options. You see, Ritual is all about transparency, which is something that I truly love. They make sure that 100% of their ingredients are made traceable, so you know exactly what you're putting into your body. And that is important when you're growing a tiny human. Plus, they're gluten and major allergen free and totally vegan. But Ritual is not just about great products. They're also a certified B Corp. That means they care about more than just profits and are fully committed to the health of people and our planet. What's really cool is that Ritual offers a subscription-based service with free shipping, control over your delivery date, and savings when you bundle. They're so confident in their products that they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. The Essential for Women Prenatal is a prenatal multivitamin that's packed with clinically studied nutrients that are essential for both you and your baby. Think nature identical choline, clinically studied folate, and 350 milligrams of sustainably sourced omega-3 DHA. These citrus or mint essence capsules are designed for optimal nutrient absorption and are gentle on your stomach too. Now, for the best part, Ritual is offering Mommy Labor Nurse podcast listeners a special discount. Visit ritual.com/Mommy Labor Nurse and 40% off your first month of Ritual will be applied at checkout. That's ritual.com/Mommy Labor Nurse for 40% off your first month. You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, where you'll gain the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need to erase the unknowns, feel in control, and have an even better birth, no matter how you deliver. My name is Liesl Teen, mom of two, practicing labor and delivery nurse, and your host. From over 8 years and counting of working at the bedside, I know that knowledge is the key to an even better birth. So tune in each week to learn about all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum from me, a labor and delivery nurse that's seen it all. And now let's get into this week's episode. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. I cannot wait this week to dive into today's episode. It is all about epidurals, their effects, and their concerns of a fellow mom preparing for her second birth. So we received a call from her on our listener line, and she shared about the challenges that she faced with an epidural during her first birth. And she's just, got some pressing questions related to epidurals. And she's totally not alone in wondering about the potential for adverse effects of epidurals. So I figured let's chat about this together. We are going to explore the possibility of that same reaction happening again in a future birth, the alternatives to pain medication, and whether either might lead to increased C-section rates. As always, our aim is to provide you with evidence-based, thorough information to help you make the best decisions for your birth journey, right? Yes. So stick around to find out more.
Hello, I have a question about epidurals. In my first pregnancy, I had an epidural that made me very lightheaded, and there were concerns of me passing out in the middle of labor. And ultimately, it also affected my daughter, whose heart rate also dropped, and I ended up having an emergency C-section. And I spent a long time trying to figure out why that happened. And later, it was suggested by a medical professional that it might have been related to the epidural, how it affected me and how it affected my daughter's heart rate. And so I also heard from my doula that if that reaction happens the first time in a pregnancy, it may not happen again in a future pregnancy. So now I am preparing to give birth in a few weeks. I have some time, but I'm really questioning whether or not an epidural would be a good idea. I really would like to avoid a repeat cesarean. And I'm not sure if that's true, if that reaction I had the first time will definitely happen again, or if it wouldn't happen again, or if there's a way to predict. A second question I have is, I heard a recent episode of the podcast where you discussed other forms of pain medication, and it sounds as if those also do have, or at least the fentanyl has a effect on the baby as well. And so I just wonder, would that potentially increase the C-section rate also? If I get lightheaded or dizzy would that also mean there's a good chance the baby will get dizzy and then, we need to run for a cesarean again? Yeah, please let me know your thoughts on that, whether there's a way to predict or how can we know whether or not there will be a really adverse effect that could lead to, some further interventions. Thank you.
Okay, that is a fabulous set of questions, and I'm so ready to dive in and just break all of this down because I am fairly certain to have a good understanding of what happened with your first birth based on what you said that led to your C-section. Now, obviously, I have to give a disclaimer with that, right? Because I'm not your care provider. I wasn't in that room, so I don't know really what happened, right? But just based on what you said, it sounds like you had a really, really big dip in your blood pressure, which is one of, it's the most common side effect that we see with moms who have epidurals. Okay. It's, called hypotension. And let's talk about why that happened. And then we'll talk about kind of a little bit more, and then we'll kind of get into whether that can happen again in a subsequent birth. Now, like I said, one of the most common side effects of getting an epidural is something we call hypotension. Basically, just a fancy word for low blood pressure. Now, why does it happen? So, epidurals can cause your blood vessels to dilate. That means they get bigger, rounder, right? More space in there. And that can actually decrease the amount of blood flowing back to your heart, which results in a drop in your blood pressure. Okay, this might sound dumb, but I'm not trying to tell you that you are dumb if you don't know what blood pressure means, but blood pressure is, when we say blood pressure, it's the pressure that the blood is exerting against your vessels, your blood vessels, okay? And I feel like a lot of people don't, until somebody told me that, I was like, oh, that's what blood pressure is? Okay. So when your heart beats, right, your heart goes like this, bum, 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 bum. So it contracts and then relaxes. And that's how your blood flows through your body. So when we get your blood pressure, you might see 120 over 80. Okay, that's a normal blood pressure. So that top number is what we call the systolic, and that is the pressure that is exerted against your vessels when your heart is contracting, when it's beating, that first boom, 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 right? And then the 80, the second number is what we call diastolic pressure, and that is the pressure that is exerted on your blood vessels when your heart is relaxed. Okay, so that's that second part of the heartbeat, and that is your blood pressure. So as you can imagine, when your blood vessels dilate, it gets a lot more space in there. If you have the same amount of blood and there's more space, that pressure is going to decrease because there's just more room in there. It's exerting less pressure against those vessel walls. Now, going back to L&D, okay? One of the first things that your body does when your blood pressure drops, it moves blood away from your placenta and, your other non-vital organs, okay? So your vital organs are things like your brain, your heart, your lungs, and your body does this to try and keep you alive. Your body's like, screw that placenta. We got to keep you alive, mom. So it starts to just direct blood flow away from that placenta. So as you can imagine, your baby does not really love this very much because your baby is getting all of its blood flow, all of its oxygen from your placenta. So if there's less blood flow going through that placenta, your baby is starting to say, what the heck is going on? I'm getting a little unstable in here. Want to learn more about epidural use during birth? Whether you're team epidural all the way or maybe you aren't so sure yet, I encourage everyone to learn about this medical pain intervention, and that's why I created the free Epidural Birth Prep Pack. Inside, you'll find printable resources to help you learn more about epidurals and help you prepare for your birth. It includes the Epidural Basics Guide, which is a quick primer on epidurals so that you know a little bit about what to expect when the time comes, our super popular hospital bag checklist so that you know your hospital bag is stocked with everything you need for that big day. You'll get traditional and visual birth plan templates to help you think through all the questions related to your birth and gain the sense of control that you deserve. And finally, you'll get a third trimester to-do list to feel completely at ease heading into labor, knowing you've checked every box. To start learning more for your even better birth, simply head on over to mommylabornurse.com/epidural pack. That's mommylabornurse.com/epidural pack to access your free epidural prep pack today. Now, most of the time, if you have a healthy term pregnancy, your baby's got a good umbilical cord, the placenta has been flowing well, like your baby, what we call, has good reserves. Okay. That means like the baby's been tolerating just the pregnancy, the labor well, and occasionally we'll have blood pressure dips, and it doesn't really affect baby at all because baby's been like doing fine in there for a while. Where we worry sometimes is where we have babies who haven't had the best reserve through no fault of really anybody's. It's usually anatomy based, but that is where we usually see some of these more drastic dips. Okay. Most of the time though, drops in blood pressure, mild, right? Requires minimal intervention, if any intervention. And, your blood pressure just picks right back up and baby's totally fine. However, severe drops in blood pressure, this can result in some scary things. Like you just said, you had to have an emergency C-section. Now, usually it does not result to that, okay? That's a pretty rare and unfortunate. I'm glad everybody was okay, and I'm glad you were able to go back to the OR pretty quickly and have a C-section. But typically, in these cases where we have a really, really severe drop after mom gets an epidural because of her blood pressure, usually some pretty simple things that we can do to get baby's heart rate back up. And so that's why I'm wondering if maybe things were, during your labor, maybe your baby didn't have the best reserve or there was something else going on. So that blood pressure dip that your body had and that heart rate dip that your baby had really, really affected things. And your baby was not tolerating it well, and your baby was not able to get its heart rate back up easily. So even us doing all the interventions in the world, it's just different when you're dealing with a baby with low reserve, if that makes sense. But let's go back to some of the things that we might do, okay, if this happens, because it is quite common if you do have those blood pressure dips after getting an epidural that you might need some of these interventions. We might give you some extra fluid through your IV, right? A little bit more volume in there helps to raise that blood pressure back up and get it so it's exerting more pressure against those vessel walls. We might change your position, or we might give you some medications through your IV that basically gets your heart to beat a little bit faster, and that can increase your blood pressure too. And I would say 90% of the time between a few of these interventions, we can get baby's heart rate back up. Baby's totally fine. Mom is totally fine. This is just something that happened. Usually what happens when mom gets a big dip like this after they get an epidural is honestly, it's usually because they just got a little bit too much medication for their body. And sometimes it's just hard to predict. The anesthesiologist, I know they dose them based on like height and weight and a few other factors. I'm not an anesthesiologist, so I don't really know the ins and outs of epidural dosing, right? But this is what I've been told. So sometimes you just get a little bit too much medication. It's just a little bit too much for you and your body. So moving on to your next birth, which is going to happen in a few weeks, what I would do is I would say this to your care team and say, hey, this is what happened the first time I got an epidural. My blood pressure really, really dipped. Try not to have that happen again. And it's possible that if you get an epidural, they can just dose it a little bit slower. They can give you kind of titrate that dose a little bit differently. And us as the nurses, we're also just going to be on like high alert, right? For any like potential dips in your blood pressure, because we don't want that to happen again. And there's a fairly good chance that it won't happen again just because we are more prepared for it to happen again. You're definitely not doomed to have this crazy blood pressure dipped for every epidural that you may get, in your life. So I hope that answered the first part of your question. Let's get into the second part of you talking about IV pain medication, fentanyl, if that can, cause the same side effects, might cause the same thing to happen. So the short answer is no, not really. We definitely want to keep moms on the monitor after they have IV pain medication because sometimes it can make babies kind of sleepy. But in my experience, from what I know about opioids during labor, they are not typically associated with these crazy big blood pressure dips that we can associate with epidural use. It's not to say that they don't affect baby, right? Because they still cross the placenta, but it doesn't affect your blood pressure in the same way that an epidural might affect your blood pressure. Really, what opioids do to your baby is kind of the same thing that it does to you. They kind of just make you kind of sleepy, kind of drowsy, but we want to be careful as obviously we don't want to have too much medication, right? Because that can make baby a little bit too sleepy, and that can potentially cause some undesirable heart rate dips in babies. But in my experience, in most cases, all it does to babies is kind of decrease their variability. Okay, so let's quickly talk about what that even is. When we say fetal variability, that just refers to the normal fluctuations in the heart rate of your baby. So us, adults, children, anybody outside the womb, right? We have a pretty constant heart rate. Okay. There's not a lot of fluctuations. Like it's going bum, 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 bum. Okay. So if we were on like a fetal monitor, it would be a pretty flat line because it's a pretty constant beat. But in a baby, in a fetus, it's not. And we actually don't want it to be. Okay. And that sounds counterintuitive. But that's actually a good indicator that your baby is getting very good oxygenated blood flow through that placenta. We want your baby's heartbeat to be variable. Like I said, it's called variability. So sometimes baby's heart rate will go bum, 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 bum. I know that sounds crazy. That sounds weird and counterintuitive, but that's what it is. And that's what we measure when we're talking about variability. So going back to fentanyl, usually the only thing that we see happen with babies when they receive opioids is a decrease in that variability. It's usually short term. Once that fentanyl wears off from you and to baby, their variability goes right back up and it's fine. But once again, I will say if your baby does not have a good reserve, remember we talked about that. If your baby has not been doing well during labor, tolerating labor, there's something anatomically off going on in there, your baby might not react well to receiving an epidural, opioids, other things. But usually we can predict this based on your fetal monitoring. Sometimes not. Sometimes babies just throw us for a loop. But usually, if we've had you on the monitor, we can say, oh, okay, this baby's got a good reserve. This baby's been tolerating labor well. It's safe to give fentanyl. It's safe for, mom to get an epidural. So I hope that answers that question as well. It's not that if you get fentanyl or another opioid during labor, that it's going to have the same reaction in the same way that it happened when you got your epidural and your blood pressure decreased. It just, you could have complications, but you could not, but it's not really for the same reason. So yeah, I hope that helped. And I wish you good luck on your VBAC. It sounds like you are interested in VBACing. I just did story questions today and somebody asked about VBACs and what was the most important thing they should do if they are planning for a VBAC. And my answer is always find a supportive VBAC provider. All right, the sound of that heartbeat means it's time for this week's segment of Birth It Up Babies. This one says, hi, I just wanted to reach out because we had our beautiful baby girl last week, and my husband and I took your epidural class. Labor and delivery went great, and we both felt so prepared with everything that was thrown at us. We also had to have an induction, so I loved how your course literally went over everything that was needed for us to learn, just in case, because we really didn't want an induction, but it was advised for us. All the tips and tricks were great. Now I'm loving the postpartum emails that I have received so far. Oh, that is great feedback. I'm so glad you like them. She says, because recovering is no joke. Yes. I also took the Milkology breastfeeding class, also a great class that you had promoted on your Instagram, and I'm so glad that I did. Breastfeeding is no joke and should be considered an Olympic sport, in my opinion. Yes, 100%, girl. I agree. Thanks again. I love following your account. Oh, that is so great. I love these. Keep them coming, guys. I love getting these messages from y'all on Instagram. If you've ever taken one of my courses, send them my way. I put them in this big old folder of, all these birth babies that I get. I have a big folder of them in my photo album, and I just go in there, from time to time, and I'll just read them, and it's so great. So keep them coming. So if you want to have an even better birth, just like this mama, head on over to mommylabornurse.com/courses to learn more about our 3 online on-demand birth classes. That is such a critical thing that people don't realize, makes such a big difference. If you're with the right provider, it can make or break your VBAC experience. So that is my advice to you. I know you're only a few weeks away from delivery, and it's a little bit harder to change providers if you were to have to change a provider now. But yes, I hope you're with a good, supportive VBAC provider. I wish you the best of luck in labor and delivery. Next week on the podcast, I'm going to be chatting with the Down There Docs. It's going to be a 3-person episode. I haven't done too many of those on the podcast, but we're going to wrap up this year with a nice little episode about pelvic floor health. It was a very entertaining episode to record, so I'm excited to share it with you guys. Last episode of the year. So I will see you guys next week. Already feeling a little more confident about pregnancy, birth, and newborn life? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can continue to erase the unknowns and never miss an episode. And if you're looking for even more, Instagram is definitely where I hang out the most. Come join our community of more than 500,000 moms for birth education, tips, and solidarity. You can find me at mommy.labornurse. Check out today's show notes and a searchable library of every Mommy Labor Nurse podcast episode at mommylabornurse.com/podcast. And while you're there, be sure to head to the blog to learn about our online birth classes too. See you next week. And remember, you can have an even better birth no matter how you deliver.